Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us here at Hawk Ridge Systems for yet another live stream. Today we're talking SOLIDWORKS drawings, tips and tricks, and we have an hour packed full of content for you I know you're going to get a lot out of. Now we want to interact with you and there's a chat pane exactly to do that. I've enlisted several colleagues to help answer your questions and even feed them back to us so we can answer them live for everyone. So just to see if that chat pane's working, I'd love you to go over there, enter in, tell me where you're coming from, where you're viewing this from, and how long you've been using SOLIDWORKS. So my name is Tim Newton, and I'll be your host for today's session. And I'm coming to you just from outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I've been using SOLIDWORKS for 20 years this spring. And what a ride it's been. I can't tell you all the fun things I've got to design, develop, troubleshoot, and all the wonderful people I've met over the years. Looks like the chat's going to light up here in a second, and that'll be cool. Now, over those 20 years, I've met a lot of smart people, but I got to tell you, my colleague today rivals all of them. So I'd like to introduce you to Ryan Navarro. Ryan, tell us where you're coming from and how long you've been using SOLIDWORKS.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm coming from the greater Boston area in Massachusetts, and I've been using SOLIDWORKS off and on since 2006 version. So I spent a couple of years doing product design in medical devices and consumer goods, and then the last almost 8 years now with Hawk Ridge Systems. So yeah, it's definitely been a lot of fun and a lot of learning over those years.
So Ryan's definitely one of the more knowledgeable SOLIDWORKS users you'll meet. He's a bit humble, but he truly is. He's one of the people I tend to go to when I'm stumped and can't figure something out. Today he's a senior application engineer, so he does things like create content for our YouTube channel, develop training content, as well as deliver that content, and also consulting with our clients to help them solve challenging issues. So Ryan, thanks for joining. I know you've got some cool stuff. We did a rehearsal earlier today, and I'm pretty excited. Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm definitely excited, especially to talk about drawings, because I feel like that's an area of the product that doesn't really get enough attention sometimes. You know, it's not the cool new thing, but it's something that almost everybody needs to get done. So hopefully we'll be able to show you some things that'll help you.
It's where the rubber meets the road, right? You described it earlier. Tell us how you described the drawing.
Well, yeah, the drawing is a contract for most companies, right? So the 3D CAD model is great, but the drawing is what's ultimately going to get inspected and essentially manufactured in terms of specifications. So it's not something you want to overlook or treat too lightly.
Absolutely not. So I'm just checking the YouTube channel comments. Oh my gosh, we have people from all over. Plymouth, Minnesota, Silicon Valley, South Africa, and so on. So thanks for listening there. I'm going to read through every one of those chat comments after the show. And let's hop into it, Ryan. I've got an agenda that we'll share with the audience here just briefly to kind of know where we're going over the next hour or so. So we're about halfway through the introduction. We got one more thing there. And then we're going to jump right into Ryan's section where he's going to give you a bunch of drawing shortcuts. I learned a few things, and I know you will too. I've got a section covering templates and sheet formats. We'll try to demystify that and make that as easy as possible. And then we'll finish it off talking about dimensioning. Now, we have packed a ton of content in the next hour. So our PowerPoint, we've actually modified it and converted it into a PDF. So down in the description, down below, you can click that link and you can go download the show notes. There's even more tips and tricks than what we're actually able to give you live. Some had to get cut for time, but they're still in the notes. So I think there's a lot of value in there, and I encourage you to download those. So let's go ahead and talk just briefly. For those of you new to Hawk Ridge Systems, I wanted to just share who we are and what we do. So here at Hawk Ridge Systems, we're a software and hardware solution provider for people involved in engineering, design, and manufacturing. So we offer quite a wide variety of tools that are used in the design, product data management, simulation, and manufacturing space. And then we also have training and services to back all of that up. It's our vision to bring innovative product design and realization solutions to radically improve the way you manage your product development process. It's our passion. Today, we cover territories across the US and Canada, and we have over 235 employees ready to help you out. So Ryan, I know you've got some great content. Let's go ahead and have you lead off and give us some shortcuts.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And as you mentioned, we've got at least an hour full of hopefully packed with tips for you. So if you do need to step out at any point or miss any of this, we will be posting the recording of this up on our YouTube channel for you to access. And there's also that downloadable companion document that goes over a lot of these tips too. But I wanted to jump right into the software here and show you some tips that should hopefully be helpful for everyone if you're not using them. We are going to start a little simpler and then build up in terms of complexity over the course of this presentation. So I want to start off with just some basic shortcuts. So I've got a drawing created with a cast part here, and I basically just want to detail out all the features that'll be machined after casting, so the hole patterns and things like that. And we know I can access projected views and different types of things like that from the command manager. In 2020, they added these more enhanced thumbnails to show us what these views look like. And that's totally fine to access commands this way. But since drawings do involve a lot of clicking and things, it's nice to take advantage of the shortcuts when we can. So we have mouse gestures, right click and swipe to activate these. And these can be customized with up to 12 now different options to choose from. So you can customize those, and the shortcut bar, hitting the S key on the keyboard, S for shortcut, also going to give us access to these commands or good old-fashioned keyboard shortcuts. So I know a lot of people probably use these in their part modeling and things, but just don't forget that you can also customize them inside your drawings. Another thing we can do if I want to place another projected view is just hit the Enter key to access the last used command. Again, pretty much all throughout SOLIDWORKS that will work, allowing me to repeat the projected view again. And then before I place any dimensions, I would like to get in my center marks and center lines. And this is something that we can do automatically through our template options or in a more manual fashion. And if we import automatically, that's going to be similar to if I check this auto insert checkbox here. And then it works, it's quick, but I don't get a ton of control over how those center marks pull in. So I find a lot of times I can improve the quality a little bit by choosing some of the manual insertion options, like forcing a bolt circle, for instance. So as I select multiples of these holes, it'll eventually define a nice bolt circle there for me. And if I want to do a slightly different pattern over here, force the linear connection lines to create something like a rectangular grid pattern. And basically getting these in first is going to make it a little bit easier for me to dimension and also get a cleaner looking result in the end, because all the dimensions will be gapped off the center marks correctly.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes.
Is it possible to directly dimension to those center marks?
Yes, yep. So you can pick the center mark, and it's a bigger target than trying to click a small hole too, for instance. So yeah, that's a great point. When it comes to placing dimensions, you kind of have decisions to make in a SOLIDWORKS drawing, whether you want to create your own new dimensions on the drawing sheet using the Smart Dimension functionality, or use model items to try to import existing dimensions from the part or assembly. So we're going to come back and look at model items later on. For right now, everything I'm going to do is going to be using the Smart Dimension tool, and I have that on a mouse gesture so I can quickly access it and place a dimension. Now, Tim, you might have seen these before, the dimensions with parentheses. Do you know what those mean?
Yeah, that's a reference dimension, right?
Right, yeah, reference dimension. And these have a very specific intent in them, which is that tolerances won't apply to reference dimensions. So they really are just for reference. And I just wanted to point out a couple of defaults that you may need to adjust if you're on a fresh install of SOLIDWORKS. The first is that dimensions we place manually with Smart Dimension are going to come in as a driven dimension, and they may get a different color associated to them. So you might see this, especially on a fresh install of SOLIDWORKS. You place a dimension, you see it's gray, and it'll even print out as gray, unless you go into your system options and change this right here, colors and dimensions non-imported. Okay, so that's the first change I would recommend on any new install. And then inside your document properties, this is a template setting, is where under your dimensions, you can clear the little checkbox that says add parentheses by default. So that will prevent these from every new dimension I create from being a reference dimension. And since we are going to talk about templates a little bit later on, I just wanted to pop open the document properties really quickly here. And we'll take a look at some of the different options that are in here. So you have your overall drafting standard like ANSI or ISO, or in this case, I'm using a modified version of the ANSI standard. And if we click on dimensions, we can see scrolling down this parentheses right here that I can clear, but you have all kinds of options on leader and arrow sizing and things. So just remember, if you're changing settings over and over on drawing sheets, then really that probably means you should be modifying the template. Same thing for if we go down to detailing here, this is where we can turn on or off auto insertion of center marks. If you don't want to be placing them manually and you just want them to pull in, and all of this is searchable. So if you just type up in the little search, you'll find the relevant command associated with it right here. So Tim's going to be talking more about template creation. But if we need to manually modify any individual dimensions, you know, a lot of people will come over to this property pane here on the left, and this is where we can add tolerances, and we can do things like unflag something as a reference dimension or remove the parentheses. But there's also a handy little shortcut for that. When you click on a dimension, you'll see this little pop-up, and if you move your mouse cursor over it, that will expand the dimension palette. Now, a lot of people might miss this. Yeah, Tim.
Oh, you might have just been going there. I always miss that. I seem to move my cursor around at the speed of light. Any way to bring it back?
Yep. Yeah, so if you're like me and your mouse is flying all over the screen, you might never even see that pop up because you need to move your mouse toward it and not away from it to get it. But there's a little trick. If you just hit the control key on the keyboard, as soon as you release control, it pops it back up wherever your mouse cursor is. So you can get that dimension palette basically anywhere on the screen, as long as you still have that dimension selected. So that's a great question. Yeah, just hit control, and when you release control, it'll pop up right there. So we can make changes. We can apply tolerances right from within this dimension palette. And there is a system option that completely disables the dimension palette. So if you don't see it at all, then it's possible you need to go into your options and turn it on. But you can use it for your tolerancing, alignment, and many other settings. So I'd encourage you to explore that. Another topic I want to talk about is styles, which are a way to reuse tolerances and other types of formatting. So if I'm going to be doing a limit tolerance like this frequently, to create a style, I can come over to my side panel here and click the little plus sign and create a new style. And then that's going to exist in this document right now. So I can reuse it on different dimensions that I create. But you can also click the save icon to save that to a design library or some other shared resource to use between documents. Styles can also be embedded into the template. So I'm going to just try to pick up the pace a little bit here and dimension some of these different holes. And you can see these little blue icons that show up are rapid dimensioning is what they call it. So there's some rules in the document properties that control the spacing and placement of these dimensions. And we'll be looking at that a little more later on in terms of how we can have it auto arrange some dimensions for us. But any tolerancing I need to do, I'll take advantage of the dimension palette to be able to do that. And then with the dimension palette, you'll also be able to access recently used tolerances too. So even if I didn't make a style for it, I can access the recently used tolerances and apply those directly. And this is what I meant about having them correctly gapped off the center marks, as opposed to if I was ever going to select the arcs after the fact, you'll see that the dimension is actually kind of intersecting that center mark there. So again, that's all settings in the document standard, but if you're particular about stuff like that, then you'll want to get the center marks in first and build from there. So there's some extra information embedded in any kind of hole wizard hole or any hole callout like that. So for those, you'll want to make sure that you're using the hole callout feature if you're not already. And this will pull in things like tap drill size, drill depth, and all that. The formatting that you see when you click on one of these can look a little bit intimidating, but this can actually be customized if you need to be using a different type of call out for your hole features. So there's a resource in that handout that talks about how to customize whole callouts inside your drawings if you need it. And a lot of these extra things we're talking about, we'll be just kind of pointing you to resources if it's not something we're going to have time to go over actually in this presentation fully. So I want to quickly recap some of the things that we mentioned here, and then we're going to move on to some alternate dimensioning schemes. So just hitting the S key to access the shortcut bar, or right-clicking and swiping to access mouse gestures. There's a resource on how to customize these and build your own shortcuts into them in the handout. Enter key to refire up your last used command. The dimension palette, which if you move your mouse around too much, just hit the control key on the keyboard to pop it back up. And then taking advantage of styles and using that as opposed to recreating the same tolerances and things over and over on a drawing sheet. Next thing I want to talk about is different dimensioning schemes and getting a little more into how should we lay out our drawings. So we probably are all familiar with baseline and chain dimensioning. Baseline dimensioning is where all the dimensions are coming off of one zero reference, and chain is where they're chained off of each other. So baseline can get cluttered visually on the sheet and take up a lot of space, but chain has a problem where even though it might be more compact, you'll get a tolerance stack up where the tolerance of each individual dimension builds up and applies to the ones before it. So just remember that under Smart Dimension, we use Smart Dimension a lot, and it does probably 90–95% of what we want. But if you click that little pull-down arrow, you'll access a variety of different dimension types, such as Ordinate Dimensions, and newer ones like Angular Running Dimensions, which is similar to Ordinate, but for a revolved shape or hole pattern like this. So Ordinate Dimensions have the benefits of baseline in terms of not having a tolerance stack up. It's basically equivalent to baseline dimensioning, but in a more visually compact way. So I wanted to show a couple examples. And this is a drawing that's a little bit more complex where we'll use multiple sheets. So if you don't have a hard limit in terms of I can only use one page per part, then I'd always recommend to take advantage of the real estate that you have and try to create a more clear drawing. And here I am using some reference dimensions. So these are not dimensions I want to inspect. These are just kind of for reference, and we can see that everything's actually controlled from these bores down on this view. And where I'm having here some detail views, these are actually calling out to a separate page, separate sheet, where all the specifics are happening. And something that can be useful when you're doing that on larger drawing packages is to take advantage of the zone callouts, location labels as they're called in SOLIDWORKS. So I have a detail view over here that doesn't have a callout yet, and I'm going to place a location label to automatically put a notation there. Location label might not be on your command manager by default, so you might want to use the command search up here to find it, and you can click and drag it onto your command manager. And then it's going to basically allow clicking on anything like this detail view and placing an appropriate callout there. So I'm going to switch the style to verbose, which just basically says in plain text where that's located. And then we can see it's saying that that view is placed on sheet 2, zone E2. So if I flip over to my second sheet and we look at the zones over here, we can see E2, and that's exactly where this detail view is. So not only does it make that easier on you, working in the drawing, it makes it easier on everyone that's interpreting it down the line. So notice too, we can have non-circular detail views, right? This is something a lot of times gets overlooked because when you go into the detail view tool, it automatically puts you into a circle. It wants me to be sketching a circle. And it's so easy to miss this yellow text here. Anytime you see the yellow text in SOLIDWORKS, I feel like a lot of times we just kind of automatically skip over it and don't look at it. But it's actually saying, sketch a circle to continue view creation, or if you don't want a circular profile, create the profile first before selecting the detail view command.
Well, Ryan,
so I'd encourage you.
I'm sure guilty Tim. Of missing that and not reading through that thoroughly when SOLIDWORKS is actually giving me like the next step or the step I need to do beforehand. So just wanted to vote again for read those yellow messages. They will save you time.
Yeah, it's so easy when you're just trying to get a part done to just kind of do the bare minimum steps of whatever the feature is asking. But I'd encourage everyone, next time you're in any feature, whole wizard or whatever, read the message that's there, because it'll probably teach you something new. I'm going to create here, just to show what the rectangular detail view does, a rectangle, and then place the detail view from that. And we can see now I have a rectangular detail view, but you might find this also, that your circle is still, your view indicator is still set to a circle. And you can see it's grayed out the option for me to switch to profile. And this is because it's set to per standard. So my drafting standard that's selected is actually prohibiting me from changing this. And this can explain a lot of strange behavior that you see in drawings if you're trying to do a foreshortened dimension, or trying to adjust your extension lines. You might feel like, hey, SOLIDWORKS is just blocking me from doing what I want. It may be because of your drafting standard that's selected. So you'd either want to go and change the settings in your template if you're going to be using a modified standard. Like a lot of our users aren't using pure ANSI or ISO, they're using some modified standard, or just locally override it, and then that'll allow me to choose the type of display that I want here.
Ryan, another vote for that. We see that often in the tech support, where the standards are just preventing a user from doing what they want. So if you do face that, you might take a look at modifying that standard.
Definitely. And this big view on the bottom, we can see, has that ordinate dimensioning scheme. And this is a really nice compact way to really cram in a lot of dimensions that we'd otherwise have a hard time accessing on a single view. So I wanted to at least go through the basics of how to set that up. And to do that, it's going to be, again, clicking the little pull down arrow underneath Smart Dimension. I'm going to choose horizontal ordinate to start, and then choose my 0 reference. So the first click is going to be a 0 reference, and then the next clicks after that are just going to automatically get dimensions associated with them. So it's actually a very fast way to detail also. And when you start getting into more cramped spaces, you'll find it will automatically jog those dimensions for you as well. Now, I think one way that you can run into trouble is if you get out of the Ordinate Dimension tool and then you want to go back and add more. Going back through the pull-down menu again is actually going to create a new set of Ordinate Dimensions, which I wouldn't want to do if I was just continuing to add to this set. So you'd want to right-click an existing dimension and add to Ordinate, which will let me keep going and keep building off from there. Now, there is a time and a place to create a separate set. So one example could be if I wanted to place dimensions on the other side of the sheet. Now I have a line that's drawing all the way across the part. So one thing I can do here is right-click and break the alignment, because these are kind of all linked together. So I can break the alignment and move that over to dimension things from the other side. But what I actually did in this other view is I actually have a second set of ordinate dimensions on the top, using the same 0 reference, but this allows me to have them all grouped really nicely and not have to worry about aligning them manually. So to do that, I just hid the second 0 reference. And if you ever want to access hidden dimensions, because you do have the option to just hide them at any point, you can go to View, Hide Show, and then Annotations under your pull-down menus. And then you'll be able to see that there's actually these light gray second 0 reference up top here. And you can just click that to toggle it, hide or show dimensions. I know everyone's probably done that at some point, where they hide a dimension and then have no idea how to get it back. It's almost like it's gone after that. So the best way to do that is View, Hide Show, and then Annotations right here. This will also show any hidden dimensions. And the last topic I wanted to cover before we switch off to Tim is virtual sharp creation. So you can see I have an imaginary sharp corner here at the intersection of these two lines. And this is another challenge that you may need to do, get some kind of representation of a virtual sharp there for clarity. And there's 2 ways to do it. One is right within the Smart Dimension tool. So from within Smart Dimension, if you right-click an edge, you'll get an option for Find Intersection. And then you can just select another edge and it will produce a virtual sharp for you right there that you can then immediately dimension to if you want. Another way to do this, if I clear that out, would be to pre-select both edges. So I can pre-select both edges holding Control, and then go to my Sketch tab and place a sketch point. And that will also create a virtual sharp right there for me.
Hey, Ryan,
So,
the visibility of those virtual sharps can depend on document properties. Again, another part of the template that we'll clarify in a moment.
yep, exactly. So the way the virtual sharp shows up, along with the center marks and everything else that we're using here, is going to vary based on your document settings. So we talked briefly about some different dimensioning schemes. We talked about the location labels, which you may need to add that command. They work with the drawing zone lines behind the scenes, which you'll see how to create those when Tim talks about creating sheet formats. We talked about finding intersection with the virtual, finding intersection sub-option of Smart Dimension to create virtual sharps, or just selecting a couple edges and grabbing a sketch point to create a virtual sharp that way. We also talked about how you can create non-circular detail views, and you may need to sometimes, anywhere in your drawings, adjust the options to kind of override from the standard if it's preventing you from doing something. But that's everything I wanted to go over in this first section. I'm going to be presenting again near the end, and we're going to be talking about that model items import and also how to dimension more complex surfaces, so spline-based surfaces. But for right now, Tim's going to take us away with more info on
Thanks, Ryan.
templates and sheet formats.
That was good stuff. So the comments are super active right now, and I saw Kelly had a question in there about converting a radius dimension to a diameter dimension, and another user actually answered the question. But just real quick, let me show you how so you get a visual example, and keep the questions coming. We sure love them. So Kelly, just right-click on that dimension, go down to Display Options, and select Display as Diameter. And of course, if it's a diameter dimension, you can go back and display it as a radius. So pretty easy to do. And yeah, there you go. All right, so let's talk about drawing templates and sheet formats and what you need to know. So templates are just files that we use to start our part assemblies or drawings. Now drawings have a few extra elements to it, namely the sheet format. So of course the drawing template, just like the other types of templates, store those document properties. And just to reiterate what Ryan said, if you find yourself starting a new file and coming in here and adjusting things like the drafting standard, or I often catch users going into units and maybe changing the unit system or just going to like 3 decimal places of precision. Again, save a template and you'll save all of that time modifying those options. The template stores custom properties that you may want to predefine. And then finally, a drawing can have an associative drawing sheet format, or you might know this as a title block. So just to show you a little visual, let's take a look at an exploded view of a drawing. You've got 2 elements. You've got the drawing sheet, and that houses the views and annotations. So things like dimensions, bills of materials, or notes are all part of the drawing sheet. And then you have the sheet format, and that has your title block, the drawing border, as well as annotations. And that's kind of on an inaccessible layer. You need to go in and edit the sheet format and able to get access to that information. So drawing templates can be made without an associative sheet format. In fact, this is the way the default templates behave in SOLIDWORKS. As I'll show you, when you use one of these, it prompts you to select a sheet format. We'll go ahead and develop a sheet format in this little demo, and then we'll associate that to a drawing template. I think this is how most organizations work with drawing templates, but let me know how you're doing it down in the comments. Do you have an associative sheet format? I'd love to know. If you do it this way, when you click that template, it'll give you an instant drawing. It's not going to prompt you to select a sheet format. It's just there. Now, sheet formats are something, and drawing templates are something we don't create all that often. So I think in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll provide you some tips and guidance on how to do that as efficient as possible. A couple of housekeeping items before we go in and do that. There's file locations that you can set for document templates and sheet formats. And I'd recommend maybe modifying the initial or the original position of these. We tend to want to store those down in like the program data folder, maybe put them on the network, or better yet, maybe PDM Vault is the best place for them. And finally, in order to get to that sheet format layer, I'm going to show you how to right-click and edit the sheet format, and then to return to the sheet, we'll edit the sheet. It's worth mentioning, while you're on that sheet format layer, all of the views on the drawing are hidden. It's a common tech support question. So let's go ahead and hop in and let me show you how to do all of this stuff. So this is a model from 3D Experience World. It was part of Model Mania that I competed in and unfortunately didn't win, but I'm gonna try again next year. I can't wait, that was pretty fun. So when I develop templates, I prefer to use a part inside the drawing. That helps me understand if the links are working or not and saves me iterations modifying that template. So let me go ahead and create a new drawing. Like I said, I'm gonna use one of the stock templates. So if you have SOLIDWORKS, you have this default template on your system. This template does not have an associative sheet format. So SOLIDWORKS prompts me to select one. And selecting the sheet format dictates the title block and the sheet size. Now it is possible to start with a blank one, but in today's example, I'm gonna start with an existing one to kind of speed up the process for you. Once I've got the template open, I'm gonna drag and drop a view. And when I drop this view, you might notice that it populates a number of fields down here in the title block. So those are linking, in this case, to the SOLIDWORKS model shown here. I'll show you how to build those links in just a moment. So the most important part I'm gonna show you is how to get access to the title block or the sheet format. You'll right click and edit the sheet format. You'll notice the title block becomes accessible. And now I can do things like sketch. So let's add a little space in here and then trim out this little section here. We're gonna add a logo in there in just a minute. Now you might think about drawing the border here itself, but SOLIDWORKS has a great tool, the automatic border, that will speed that process up, as well as build the location labels that Ryan showed a little bit earlier. So with the automatic border, I can very easily come in and set how many rows, how many columns I want, and it'll annotate those and associate those to the labels that you saw. So don't draw the border, maybe use that automatic border creation. It's quite a bit more quick. Other sheet format endeavors is you might wind up adding notes, and a great way to add notes is through the design library. So here I can drag and drop in a block tolerance just like so. So if you do find yourself using the same note over and over, reuse it through the design library. Now you might notice the font here is different. We use a different font, and I want this to be consistent across my drawing template. So let me go ahead and use the Format Painter. You'll notice in the little tooltip, the Format Painter allows you to select an annotation, like this dimension, and select another annotation that's going to apply all of the attributes of that first one. So here on the note, I'll pick on this one, and it'll automatically change the font to my preferred font. Now I've actually got a lot of this to do here. So maybe the Format Painter isn't the most effective or efficient way to go. I'm going to hit some shortcuts, F5, and that's going to show my selection filters. I'm going to choose the selection filter for notes, and that's going to only allow me to select notes. So you see that little filter icon, that means I'm limiting my selection. So let me window select in here. We'll get all of the notes over there. Now, I guess I should have shown, I could hit Control A to pick all of the notes. Control A is all. But I only want to do these ones over here. So we'll go ahead and window select. And I'm going to come in and choose my favorite font. And we'll set a size that's appropriate for the drawing. And just like that, we've updated all of that. Now, I'm going to hit F6. That clears your selection filter. I use that pretty frequently. And then we'll finish off hitting F5 to hide that selection. Now that was a whole bunch of rapid fire tips for you. So let me go back to the PowerPoint and just show you quickly that in that handout, I have all of that information all documented in here, as well as links to other assets, like a video on selection filters by one of my colleagues, Jacob Ames, that was really well received. So check that out if you've got questions on selection filters. Now another thing I might wind up doing is moving some of this stuff around, getting it into position. A great tool that, well, I didn't know was there until a few days ago, is you can right-click on a drawing annotation and snap to the rectangle center. So what I'll do is I'll select some lines here that make up a rectangle, and it's going to snap into that center position. I'd love to know in the chat, did you know that option was there? I sure didn't.
Yeah, that one blew my mind, Tim. I was always zooming in and dragging those notes around, so.
I knew when you didn't know that one, it was a good one. So thanks, Terrence, for bringing that to my attention. Other things that we might wind up doing developing the template are placing notes. So sometimes on a drawing, we want the users to type in some notes. And right now, this sheet format's kind of at this different layer I need to get into. So a way to do this is you can add a note, and I just put a placeholder in there. And then up here under sheet format, I'm going to use this title block fields tool. Here I can define a location on the sheet, so it now knows where the title block is at. And then I can select fields. So we'll pick our note there. We can even add a tooltip, say comment. And using that title block fields, if I get out of this mode, I'm going to do that by right-clicking and editing the sheet. You'll notice the view came back. But now what I'm able to do is if I click on that title block table, it'll activate. And now any of those notes, I can go in and double click, and I don't actually have to go into the sheet format in order to type stuff in there. So that's kind of a handy one that was added a few years ago. Let's go back to that sheet format and do some more things with notes. Now you might have noticed when I Windows selected, there was a whole bunch of notes in here that showed up that didn't have any characters in them. So these are, in this case, links, and the links don't have any values inside them. One thing I'd recommend when developing sheet formats is to go into View, Hide Show, and turn on Annotation Link Errors. That's going to show any of those annotations that don't have a link at the moment. There's no value in the link. So you'll see how all of those hidden notes showed up. I also like to show annotation link variables. And what that's going to do is when I go in and double click on one of these linked notes, it's going to show me the variable. Now, in the handout, I document 4 different ways you can link, but in reality, probably 95% or more of the time you're linking to one of 2 things. So the first one, PRP, to me, that means it's going to link to a custom property inside this drawing document. This one down here, PRP sheet, means it's linking to a model shown in the drawing. Now you can have many models shown in the drawing, so the question becomes which one? Well, under the properties of the sheet, you can go in and specify. You can pick a view, and those custom properties will be pulled from the model shown in that view. Okay? So let me get this note out of here, because we're going to add an image there. And I'll show you how to create, for example, this link to the description shown in that part. So let me get rid of that. And I'll come up to annotations. I'll place a note in here. I got to go and use the right font because I'm looking at somebody for marketing, and this is important stuff. Let's go in and set a size. And now I'm going to come over here to the Note Property Manager, and I'm going to click Link to Property. And it's going to say, well, what do you want to link to, Tim? The current document or some other document? So I'm going to link to another document, that one specified in the sheet properties. And now I can drop this menu down and I can see all of those properties. So these SW ones, those are built in. They're always in files. And then these other ones are ones that I use. And the reason I like to have that view on the sheet is it makes these properties accessible. So I know I've got them set up right. I don't have to try it, test, and refine. I just get it right the first time. So let me go ahead and link that note to the description. We see its value get populated, so we know it's working. Click OK, and we're on our way. All right. One last thing I'm going to do here. A couple last things, I'm sorry. I'm going to go ahead and hide those link errors. This is a system-wide option, so I like to turn it on while I'm developing the sheet format and turn it off when I'm done. I'm also going to go in and insert a picture. So let me go grab our latest Hawk Ridge Systems logo. And you might look at that, and now this is a PNG file, and PNG files can contain transparent colors. So if I say transparent from file, it'll recognize the transparent color in the file. Got other options to go in and actually specify the color you want to make transparent, or just use the image as it is. I can scale that around using the drag handles or the scale tool here. So if I position the scale tool like so, I could say this is 2 1/4 inches, and it'll scale that image to the size. So let me go ahead and drag that into position down here. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to go back to editing the sheet. Now, I guess it's worth mentioning, you can use confirmation corner to get back. So kind of like sketch mode, it's that indicator that you're in a sketch. Or on the sheet format, there's also the edit sheet format toggle here. So either way, right-clicking in the blank area to edit sheet, or using those other techniques. All right, so a couple last things that we'll complete before saving the sheet format and the template is I'm going to remove the drawing view. I don't want that linked. and I'll save the sheet format. So you'll find that option under File, Save Sheet Format. And it's going to pop me into a location. This is the default location under your C program data. This is where SOLIDWORKS puts it. But I've had a challenge with that. I forget that the files are in there, or I overwrite them. Just that's not a normal spot I save my data. You can put them on the network, but I use PDM, so I'm going to store them in PDM so I can have some of the same benefits that I have on normal SOLIDWORKS files. And what I'm talking about is revision control. So let me give this a name, the format. Let's call it CLive Stream. We'll save that in there. So that saved that title block in the borders. Now what you'll want to do is you'll want to tell this drawing I'm working on to use that sheet format. At the moment, it's still using the original that we started with. So I'll scroll down the list here and find my newly created sheet format, and we'll tell it to utilize that. There we go. So now we have this drawing linking to that sheet format. The last thing I'm going to do is save the template. So that's kind of an abbreviated look at developing these. Let me go ahead and give this a name. We'll call it again CLive Stream. Save. Okay, so now let's see if it works. I'm going to go back to my part. I'm going to issue that make drawing command. I'm going to choose my CLive Stream, and we're going to see if that title block doesn't populate when we add our view. There we go. Shoot. Well, live stream has to be live. One of the other things I intended to show you that I just remembered I skipped over is sometimes I like to add predefined views to my template. So when I use them, the views just automatically populate. So a moment ago, what I had intended to do is use a predefined view showing the front view and then project a few views off of it. And if you do this to the template, the next time you use it, those predefined views will just automatically populate for you. Okay, let's go back to the handout because I covered a lot of information really rapidly there. There's some information about linking properties, that automatic border, the title block tool. And this is a good summary showing kind of the process. So after I've saved the sheet format, what you want to do is then link that sheet format, link the drawing to that sheet format. Ooh, I missed two things here today, Ryan. Well, sometimes the rehearsal, it doesn't go quite like it did in the rehearsal.
I was going to say, though, Tim, that step of linking the drawing to the sheet format is the one I think everybody misses before they save the template. Because I'm sure other people have experienced this where you click to add a new drawing sheet and then it pops up and says, "Hey, there's no sheet format
I can't find it. Yeah,
right?" And that's almost always the cause right there. Is the sheet format was not associated to the template before it was saved. So I just want to emphasize that one.
Good call. So you'll also want to consider the document options. Set that unit to 3 places of precision if that's the way you want to work. Choose the right drafting standard for your need and skip all those steps. And finally, save the template. I'm going to actually go back and highlight a few options here in just a moment because I feel like it's worth touching on. Right after I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to reload the sheet format. Oftentimes we get the call, I got a bunch of drawings, we got a new logo, we changed our address, whatever. I need to refresh that title block. How do I do that? So I'll show you a manual and an automated way to do exactly that. Let me open up a drawing here real quick. And before we go in and reload the sheet formats, I wanted to just point out a couple of options that I think are worth thinking about. So you have system options, right? These are system-wide things. And a couple of drawing options that I'd recommend is I'm not a big fan of reduce spacing when dimensions are deleted or edited. If you found you deleted some dimensions and a whole bunch jumped around on you, it's this option that's responsible for that. So you can just leave them in place if you clear it. And then an option I like to turn on is to reuse letters from deleted auxiliary detail or section views. So if I go in and remove a detail view, say B, instead of going in and making detail C, it'll actually go back to detail view B and label that correctly. Other document properties, we mentioned the dimensioning standards being extremely influential. You want to set that. Here's the unit where you can go in and change the number of decimal places. And if you do modify this stuff, it's possible to actually save this combination of drafting standards out and then load those into other files using the save and load commands here. Here's two other tips that I think are appropriate. If you want to move views, you might put your cursor over the border to get it, but after a couple of Red Bulls, that might be hard to grab. So I like to just hold Alt, and I can grab anywhere inside that view and move that view around. Just super simple. Just hold Alt, and you're able to move the views as well as tables that aren't anchored to a location. So next time you start grabbing the border to try to get it to move, just think about that Alt key and see if that doesn't even make it easier. Here we can see the title block. I've got a newer version that uses a logo in here. And if I come down here to just show you something, this is inside my PDM vault. And here I've got the sheet format this drawing's referencing. Now, this file in PDM has multiple versions. I know it looks like one file, but it's actually got multiple versions. And if I look at the history of the file, I'm able to see who did it, when, and then comments to describe why. So here we can see the second version had a logo added, and then a third version where an address was changed. So what I can do is go to the properties of that sheet and just reload. It tells it, go out, grab that sheet format, and drag it back in. Of course, if I created a different sheet format file, I could select that at this point. But let me just go ahead and reload that, and we'll see my logo appear just like that. So that's one way, a manual way to update your title block, but it does require you to actually open those documents and reload them. So oftentimes, if you've got many of them, that might not be the best way. Another productivity set of tools that we offer at Hawk Ridge Systems is called CustomTools. And this solves many of the challenges that users face. Now, there are macros floating around on the internet that enable you to do bulk sheet format reloads. You might wind up doing a little bit of coding. I have. Not a terrible thing, but CustomTools just works. And in many cases, it's more robust than those macros. There's a free trial in the links down below. What I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to say, just to give you an idea of what it can do, though, it can like create a whole bunch of drawings and merge them into a PDF. Or I'm going to have it reload my sheet format. I can just hit OK. It's going to go ahead and do that. Now, I just did that on the document that's open here in SOLIDWORKS, and you'll notice I got a brand new, entirely different sheet format this time. But it is possible for us to select more than what's open in SOLIDWORKS. I could go in and add a file full of documents, like right here. I've got a folder that has many drawings in it, and I could actually use that to create PDFs and then make a merged PDF. Hey, Ryan, you and I were talking before the show about this approach and what we see customers doing.
Yeah, so I mean, I talked about using multiple sheets in a drawing, right, when you don't have a limit, but there are some customers that have requirements to have, for an entire project, have all the drawings in one package, like a giant packet that travels around. And in those situations, you can run into all kinds of kind of scalability problems if you start adding hundreds of sheets to your single SOLIDWORKS drawing with different model views and things like that. So using a kind of tool like this to automatically print off a whole bunch of separate PDFs and then merge them together into one packet, I think is a great solution. And it's really no extra work.
I think it's the right thing to do, but I'll read through the comments and see if anybody has anything to say about that. But I think there's a couple reasons, like performance, and then I don't want to redetail that same commonly used part time and time again just because I want it in the same drawing wrapper to make one PDF. So I think this is the right way to go, but let me know what you think in the comments. All right, so that kind of concludes drawing templates, sheet formats, and then updating sheet formats. Ryan, you've got some more information, some more tips and tricks revolving around dimensioning, right?
Yeah, and it gets into, I expect that there'll be a little more controversy we can see in the chat on who's using model items and who isn't. So let us know in the chat if you are using it, if you tried it once, and what you thought about it. I wanted to show some tips on, I think, how you can use it more effectively and when it works and when it doesn't work. So this slide I have up is just showing that Model Items tool allows us to import dimensions from the part or assembly over onto the sheet. And there is some auto arrange functionality that can be used, or they can map over with the placement that they had in the model. So just to be 100% clear here, I'm going to show a SOLIDWORKS model, and the types of dimensions we're talking about are, these ones that when we double click on our features, we're seeing these different dimensions here. So you can make the argument, well, since I already have all those dimensions, why would I want to recreate them on the drawing, right? I should just be able to bring those over. And that's exactly what the model items tool does. So I have a drawing here. This was created with model items. I'm going to just wipe out the dimensions so we can go back through this. And you'll access that command right on the model item, right on the annotation toolbar next to your smart dimension. I also have it on a shortcut. And I think the first area you can go wrong is this upper prompt. So whether or not you want to import across the entire model or feature by feature. So on a simple part like this, I might be able to get away with entire model, but on anything more complex, if you want to be using this, I would use it on just a handful of features and then space out those dimensions and do it in a more controlled fashion. That way you can control which dimensions land on which views and so on. The default includes dimensions marked for drawing, which we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. And I'm also going to turn on whole callouts and whole locations. Down here, you can see the option use dimension placement in Sketch. And so this will map them over the way they were in the part, essentially. So if I just click the check mark, we're going to see all these model items import. And I think this is probably where a lot of people stop and don't ever use the tool again when they see a screen that looks like this. Because if you have lots and lots of dimensions, they can get pretty jumbled and it can start to feel overwhelming when they all pop in at once.
That's a tough feeling when you look at that there, Ryan. You're just like, oh man. All of that.
Yeah, and you can start dragging them and trying to make sense of them. But we do have an auto arrange function. So I mentioned in the document properties, there's rules on dimension spacing and gaps. So if we box select all these dimensions and then use the dimension palette flyout, the first option here on the bottom is to auto arrange. And if you click that, it'll try to space all these things out using the rules that spacing set in the document properties. And that actually, in this case, does a good job. There's also a scale here, so you can actually add a little bit more or a little bit less spacing by adjusting this slider here if you want to do that. So this is always something to try, and especially if you have, kind of that medium quantity of dimensions, you should have pretty good luck with the auto arrange. And then there's still further cleanup we can do, because remember, we can click and drag the endpoints of these dimensions to move them to different areas to make the view a little bit cleaner. So this is a way that we can do our detailing without really having to recreate those smart dimensions on the model, since they were already over in the part level. Now, I wanted to show a couple of different workflows for this, though, because that auto arrange won't always be the magic bullet. So I'm going to delete these, and we'll look at how to import feature by feature using the model items tool. So I'm just going to go back in and choose to import with the selected feature. And if I uncheck use dimension placement in Sketch, behind the scenes, that's basically going to perform the auto arrange for me automatically. So that might be a better way to go if you're not carefully laying out your sketches like they're intended to be imported to the drawing. So now when I click on a feature, it's just going to pull over the dimensions associated with that feature. And this way, if I wanted to have other dimensions on another view, I could do that. We can also actually right-click to show or hide dimensions that we may not want to import. So if there's just one dimension that you don't need in that import, you can right-click to hide those. So this is a way that even on more complex drawings, you can choose the view that the dimensions are going into and just choose particular dimensions and pull information over. It almost always works really well for whole wizard holes with the callout information and all that type of data. Now, there are some other considerations with it, which are that you need to have the dimensions there. So if you have a part that's designed, let's say in context in an assembly, you may not even have that dimension information, or you might have too much dimension information. You might have dimensions to references that you don't want. This was designed in an assembly, and so it's got some dimensions that kind of point off to space, to some offset origin, or you might have master sketches that have things that aren't going to import well over to your drawing sheet. So if you want to plan on using model items, you can be a little more effective with it by selectively marking or clearing dimensions for drawing. So all these dimensions by default get marked for drawing, but we can clear that flag by right-click. And then when we look at our dimensions, we'll see those show up, and those ones will get ignored by the model items import. And there's even a system option you can enable to not mark any dimensions by default. So you'd have to actually manually mark the ones you want to pull over. And if you really want to go down the path of using model items, you can even actually start applying tolerancing information directly inside the part level. So you can have not just dimensions, but also tolerances applied at the part level and pull over that information to the drawing. So I think the biggest consideration with model items is, do you want to be worried about laying out the dimensions as they will be on the drawing sheet while you're modeling, right? Because that can be a little bit restrictive to the designer if you're just trying to get the part done. And maybe for your design intent and model rebuild updates and things like that, you need to have it laid out in a certain way. You might not want to be worrying about how it's going to look on the drawing. So there's definitely pros and cons, but for a lot of geometries, you can get away with importing model items for the vast majority of the part. And if you can't do that, you might be able to do it selectively for just some features. There's one final consideration about it that can kind of put some people off, and that is that these are editable from the drawing sheet. So unlike a smart dimension, you can actually make a change to model items dimensions, and it will actually rebuild the model from the drawing sheet. So this can be a good thing if you have users that are maybe accustomed to 2D CAD, or they don't feel completely comfortable manipulating the big sketches and things that are in the driving models. But this can also be a downside if you're worried about version control and things like that. So all the smart dimensions that we place by default, if I, by comparison, put a smart dimension here, that's a driven dimension that will update if the model changes, but it won't allow me to edit it. If I try to double click, we can see it's grayed out down here. Model items will allow you to edit and actually initiate a change in the model. So if that's the only reason you're not using it, I wouldn't let it be, because you can disable that. It's not the easiest thing to disable, but just to recap, we looked at how you can take a mess of dimensions, whether it's from model items or from someone who's not terribly talented at drafting. You can plop a whole bunch of dimensions down and then auto-arrange them and get a much better result. You can mark or not mark dimensions for drawing, either selectively one at a time or by checking or clearing the system option that's available. And then if you want to prevent users from being able to change these from the drawing, these imported model items, there's a registry key that can disable that. So this is something the administrator would need to do on the systems that are using SOLIDWORKS. So you can disable that functionality. Now, there's one last topic I wanted to talk about that comes up pretty frequently, I think, which is how do we dimension spline surfaces? And then we will be wrapping up, and we'll just have some kind of dedicated time for questions and answers at the end here. But I see a lot of people stay away from using splines at all because of the challenge that they present when it comes time to dimensioning on the drawing. So you might think to just stick with lines and arcs because they're easier to detail. And there can be truth to that, but sometimes you need a spline surface. So the first thing we usually see for dimensioning a spline would be just placing a whole bunch of points and dimensioning to those locations. But technically, if you think about what that's tolerancing and what that's representing, really we're only controlling those few points. So there's nothing to stop that a surface that looks like this with all these grooves and ripples would technically pass an inspection. So the intent of it, I think, is pretty clear, but it's not great in the sense of the contract. If there happens to be a fit spline, fit splines can be created and overlaid on top of existing lines and arcs. So we can take advantage of any underlying sketch data, like a combination of lines and arcs, show those sketches on the drawing, and then detail off of those. Or really, the most proper way to do it would be with something like a profile of a surface, geometric dimension and tolerance feature control frame. So this is, if you look at how much simpler it is in terms of setting up, very straightforward, and then it's also giving us the most control and flexibility as well. But I know there's a lot of people shying away from GD&T, but there's a lot of people also relying on it heavily. And if you do get into that domain, that also ties in nicely with some of the more forward-looking technology like model-based definition and 3D PDFs and so on.
Hey Ryan,
But I want to
I've probably been one of those that have shied away from GD&T. It always seemed like, well, hieroglyphics to me, but that's a great example of the simplicity of GD&T as opposed to other dimensioning schemes. It's more comprehensive. It's also easier for us to do.
Yeah, simpler visually, and then also a lot of the times we're able to have more of a tolerance zone that will, it should make the part cheaper compared to trying to tightly control something with separate dimensions. And I know our solid professor has a video course on geometric dimensioning and tolerancing that can be helpful for anyone that wants to get into that. But I did want to show some things inside SolidWorks here, just from this example. So just to show, sketching in a drawing, this is something that might get overlooked a little bit. We can place, as we did for the detail view, we can sketch. And for instance, I can place a sketch point right onto a spline here and drop a point there. And to be clear, because this is a spline surface, I can't just smart dimension it, right? That's the whole challenge that we're dealing with. But these points, you can see they're blue, they're underdefined. So just like part modeling, when you're using a combination of relations essentially on a sketch, this first dimension is going to control the horizontal placement, and that's a driving dimension that I can adjust. And then the second dimension here is going to be driven. So this one won't be able to be adjusted because that point is already fully defined. So if you are going to detail in this way, you just kind of have to realize that the first dimension I'm placing is driving in this case, and then the second dimension is going to be driven. So you can set that up that way. Showing sketches, I think, is tremendously valuable to know how to do on a drawing sheet, because you might have master design sketches and things that have useful information in them that you want to reference. So in this case, we happen to have that sketch with the fit spline. But how to hide or show a sketch is find the name of the drawing view, like this drawing view 8, go through the feature tree and expand from the feature tree the drawing view and expand down through the part or assembly's feature history. And then we can see the features and individual sketches. So by default, your sketches will be hidden, but you can right-click and show those if you want to reference any of that underlying data. And in this case, I was just using it to show a really basic example of getting some dimensions onto here to reference off of really we're referencing the underlying sketch, right? Rather than referencing a spline, because fit spline is just this special case of a situation where it gets generated on top of lines and arcs potentially.
Hey Ryan, going through the feature manager tree in the way you just did there enables you to show that sketch only in that one view. So I don't have to show it globally, but I could go into just the one I want, display it there, and everything else is just fine, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the few cases where I'm expanding and collapsing things inside the drawing view feature tree, because it's we don't really generally have a lot of reason to go into there. And then finally, for geometric dimensioning and tolerancing on the drawing, if you're using DimExpert or MBD dimensions in the model, you can import those over. But if not, you're just coming in and placing a geometric tolerance feature control frame, whether or not I have datums here, and then place that like so. And with GD&T, we can still have dimensions that provide useful references for the person reading it. So we just want to make sure if we want to have some nice overall dimensions and things, that we're marking those as basic dimensions. So from my dim palette, I can mark these as basic dimensions, and this will basically be the theoretical dimension, but it's not the basic dimension that's controlling the size of the feature. It's basically this type of dimensioning the profile of a surface should be referencing back to the CAD model. And for inspection purposes, you'd be using something like a CMM machine, digital off the CAD model. But these basic dimensions are still helpful for maybe a machinist choosing a piece of bar stock or something to be able to figure out what we need to cut this part out of. So that was a lot of information, and this is a bigger topic that could go on and on. But I just wanted to show some different techniques there and kind of transition into talking about your further learning resources. SOLIDWORKS has a couple of tutorials built in just for drawings inside the software that you can access. Of course, you've got our YouTube channel where you're watching this right now, where we upload videos. And then we also offer live online classes. So the drawings course in particular is a 2-session live instructor-led training where you can hop in and ask questions and things like that. And we're partnered with Solid Professor in their on-demand video training. So they've also got trainings on drawings and GD&T and
Real
so on.
wide variety of content there, Ryan, huh? Like even more than just what you'd expect normal CAD day-to-day stuff, but yeah, other content like GD&T you mentioned.
Yeah, and if you're on one of our newer subscription plans, you might already have access to Solid Professor too, or that's something you can look forward to in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great complement to live in-person training. I've always found that students who come in with some prep work ahead of time absorb the deeper lessons, and that's a great way to get primed for an opportunity with an instructor to get the most out of that.
Definitely.
So Ryan, we're up to our hour. In fact, we're a little bit over, but I think it was worth it because some of those tips and tricks seemed well received in the chat. So thank you for putting this together, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. I sure had fun.
Yeah, it was great to get an opportunity to explore all these options with everybody, and hopefully you found some things that you wouldn't have seen before.
So I want to thank you all for joining us here at Hawk Ridge Systems, and until the next one, we'll look forward to it.